There is something sacred about the hours just before sleep, when the lights dim, when the noise of the day begins to fade into silence, and we are left alone with our thoughts, our fears, and our soul. In that fragile stillness, many people try to forget. They scroll through screens, they lose themselves in noise, they beg for sleep to come quickly and without dreams. But Padre Pio, he did the opposite. He embraced the silence. He welcomed the quiet as a threshold, a moment of surrender, of offering, of deep intimacy with the divine. For him, night was not just the end of the day, it was the beginning of something deeper, a portal between two worlds, the visible and the invisible, the flesh and the spirit, the burdened earth and the waiting heaven. Padre Pio spent many nights awake, not because he couldn't sleep, but because he chose to keep watch. In the monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo, as the other friars rested, Padre Pio would remain in prayer, sometimes kneeling, sometimes weeping, sometimes battling forces unseen to the human eye. His cell was humble, stone walls, a wooden bed, a crucifix worn with time. But in that space, eternity would break in. He would whisper things in the dark, words not meant for men to hear, but for angels and for God. And always, before allowing his body to rest, he would say a phrase so simple, so disarmingly brief, that it might escape the notice of the world. But it carried the weight of eternity. He did not shout it, he did not preach it, he simply lived it. But before we reveal that phrase, before we even speak it aloud, we must understand the kind of man who entrusted his soul to it. Padre Pio was not a saint who lived apart from suffering. Quite the contrary. He suffered more deeply than most could bear. Physical pain from the stigmata, yes, but also emotional and spiritual torment. He was misunderstood, accused, silenced by his superiors, and watched by skeptics. There were times when even the church questioned the authenticity of his experiences. And yet, he never lost his peace. Why? Because he knew where to rest his soul. He knew how to close the day, no matter how heavy, with the words that placed everything into God's hands. He knew that before the body could sleep, the soul needed to surrender. There's a story, a true one, about a young friar who came to Padre Pio one evening, tormented by thoughts he couldn't escape. The kind of thoughts that come like a swarm, anxious, confusing, suffocating. He told Padre Pio he feared the night, that his mind became a battlefield the moment his head touched the pillow. Padre Pio looked at him, not with impatience, not with judgment, but with that deep, piercing gaze that seemed to read the soul like a book. And then he said gently, "Before you sleep, say this phrase, not with your lips only, but with your heart. Say it like someone letting go." The young friar obeyed. That night, the chaos began to settle. His sleep was not perfect, but it was different. And slowly, over the nights that followed, he began to reclaim a sense of peace, of spiritual order, of being held. He would later say that this one phrase became like a shield, a lamp, a breath. But what is it about the night that makes such words so powerful? The night is not just a time, it's a space, a veil, a moment when the soul, freed from the distractions of daylight, comes face to face with what it carries, our hidden griefs, our unspoken prayers, our deepest regrets. In the silence, they rise. Padre Pio understood this spiritual vulnerability, and he didn't fear it. He stepped into it with trust. He saw the night as an offering. While the world slept, he kept vigil, not for his own sake, but for others, for the sick, the suffering, the dying. He said once, "I belong entirely to everyone. Every soul that comes near me, I want to lead to God." And that mission didn't stop when the sun went down. Even when his body begged for rest, his soul stood watch. He knew that demons did not sleep. That temptation sometimes whispers loudest at midnight. That wounds can throb hardest when the world is quiet. And so he prayed, he whispered, he cried out to God in secret, and then he entrusted everything with one phrase. But before we speak that phrase aloud, let's linger here, in this mystery, because maybe you too have felt it, That ache before sleep, that quiet dread, that sense that something unfinished remains in your chest when the lights go out. Maybe you've tried to silence it with noise, with distraction, with exhaustion. But what if the silence is not your enemy? What if the silence is where God is waiting? Padre Pio would tell you not to run from it. He would tell you to kneel beside your bed, even just for a moment, and whisper the phrase he trusted more than anything. He would say, surrender isn't weakness, it's power. It's the power to give everything you can't control into hands that are eternal. There are no perfect days, no perfect people, but there is a perfect surrender. And before sleep, in the final breath of your waking, that surrender becomes holy. Padre Pio believed that how we close the day shapes how we rise in the next. That sleep is not an escape, but a continuation of trust, a silent journey into the arms of the one who never sleeps. So as the stars rise, as your room darkens, as your heart slows, what will you say? What will you offer? What phrase will echo into the heavens from your lips? Stay with me, because in the next part, we will explore the phrase itself, the words Padre Pio whispered with sacred devotion, and why they hold the power to transform not only your nights, but your life. This phrase is not magic. It's something more. It's a key. And once it's yours, nothing remains the same. What happens when you speak something not just with your lips, but with your soul? Padre Pio understood this question better than most. To him, prayer wasn't about eloquence or volume, it was about alignment, the heart aligning with heaven, the soul aligning with truth, the will aligning with surrender. And that, he believed, could happen even in the simplest phrase, especially in the simplest phrase. He often told those who came to him, words that come from the depth of the heart rise to the heights of heaven. But the question was never just what to say, it was how to say it, and when. In Padre Pio's spiritual life, the moment before sleep was charged with hidden meaning. It was a daily death and a small resurrection. Just as Christ, before his last breath, cried out, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit," so too did Padre Pio teach that every night the soul should be placed willingly back into the hands of God. Because sleep is not guaranteed, because tomorrow is never promised, because rest, in truth, is a form of faith. To repeat a phrase before sleep for him was not superstition, it was surrender. But why does repetition matter at all? In the spiritual life, repetition is a form of rooting. What we repeat, we plant, and what we plant in the still soil of the night will grow quietly in the soul by morning. Science tells us that the subconscious mind is most impressionable in the moments before sleep. The thoughts we carry into rest tend to settle deep into memory, emotion, and habit. But long before psychology gave it a name, Padre Pio lived this truth with divine intuition. He understood that the devil doesn't always come with fire and thunder. Sometimes he comes with whispers, doubts, accusations, questions left to fester in the night. And so Padre Pio used repetition as armor, a way of engraving truth onto the soul until no lie could penetrate it. Jesus, I trust in you. That phrase, just 6 words, was the sword he handed to others, but not just to be said, to be lived. To say, Jesus, I trust in you after a good day is easy, but to say it after failure, after rejection, after heartbreak, after hearing news you never wanted to hear. That is the true test of faith. That is when the phrase becomes more than words. It becomes an offering. Padre Pio knew suffering intimately, the pain of physical wounds, yes, but also the pain of silence, years when he was forbidden to speak publicly or say Mass in view of the faithful. The pain of being doubted by his own, the pain of bearing the secrets of thousands of souls in confession, the invisible weight of spiritual fatherhood. And yet, through all of it, he whispered, Jesus, I trust in you. He did not say, Jesus, I understand you, because trust is greater than understanding. He did not say, Jesus, I feel you, because trust is not dependent on emotion. He said, I trust. And trust is an act of the will, a choice made not in the light, but in the dark, especially in the dark. So what happens when we repeat that phrase every night? What happens when, regardless of what the day held, be it joy or sorrow, clarity or confusion, we end it with that same whisper. Something changes. The soul begins to unlearn fear. Not because fear disappears, but because the heart finds a place to rest within it. Repetition forms habit, and holy habit forms character. Padre Pio wanted his children, those who followed his spiritual path, to become people whose reflex in every circumstance was trust. And that begins not in grand gestures, but in the quietest moments. Alone in the dark, head resting on the pillow, eyes closed, one phrase on the lips. He taught that when we say, "Jesus, I trust in you," before sleep, we are placing our spirit into the sacred heart of Christ. Like placing a child into the arms of a parent. Like handing over the keys to a locked room and saying, "You take care of this now, I'm done worrying." And heaven responds to that kind of trust. There are stories, dozens, maybe hundreds, of people who claimed that this small act of faith changed their lives. One woman, a widow from Naples, wrote in a letter to the friary that for years she had suffered from insomnia. Anxiety would steal her peace night after night. She had tried everything: medicine, meditation, distraction. Nothing lasted. Then she read about Padre Pio's nightly prayer, and she decided, almost skeptically, to try it. The first night she repeated it 3 times. "Jesus, I trust in you." 3 times. Then sleep came, gentle, quiet, restful, and for the first time in years she woke up not exhausted but calm. The next night she did it again, this time 5 times. Over the weeks it became a rhythm, a sacred closure. She wrote that even when grief still visited her, it was now accompanied by peace. "It's as if someone holds me," she wrote, "like a mother would hold her child in the dark." That's what trust does. It doesn't always change the circumstances, but it changes who we are within them. Padre Pio taught that trust is the only true antidote to spiritual despair. Because despair says, "There is no way." Trust says, "I don't see the way, but I know who leads me." Despair says, "I'm alone." Trust whispers, "You are with me, even here." And that's why he urged repetition. Because the world repeats other things: noise, fear, temptation, confusion. If the soul does not fight back with truth, it begins to absorb the darkness. So Padre Pio gave us something small, something childlike, not a long prayer, not a theological treatise, just a phrase like a candle in the wind. But candles in the dark change everything. He used to tell the friars, "Even when you feel nothing, say it. Even when everything inside you screams the opposite, say it. Because every time you do, it weakens the enemy and strengthens the soul. And in time, the soul begins to believe what it says." There are those who asked him, "Isn't it dangerous to trust blindly?" He answered with silence. Then finally, "It is dangerous not to. Because if you do not place your trust in Christ, you will place it somewhere else. In money, in health, in control, in other people's approval, in your own strength. And all of those will eventually fall. But he won't." That is the unshakable center Padre Pio returned to every night. That no matter what storms rose, no matter what darkness surrounded him, no matter what war raged in the unseen world, he could still close his eyes and breathe the same words. "Jesus, I trust in you." He believed that this was the safest place a soul could rest, and that's why he shared it with others, not just as a suggestion, but as a lifeline. And maybe that's what it can be for you. Not a ritual, but a refuge. Not a magic trick, but a movement of the heart. Not a habit, but a home. A place you return to every single night, until one night, it's the last thing you ever say. And then, you will wake up in the arms of the one you trusted. "Jesus, I trust in you." 6 words, whispered, repeated, believed. But perhaps their power lies not just in what they say, but in what they undo. Because in a world that teaches us to hold on, this phrase teaches us to let go. In a world that glorifies control, this phrase invites surrender. In a world that demands answers, this phrase gives peace without explanation. For Padre Pio, this phrase wasn't a sentence, it was a sanctuary. And when he gave it to others, he wasn't offering advice, he was opening a door that led into the very heart of Christ, where all anxieties dissolve into mercy and all fears are calmed by the gaze of a Savior who never sleeps. When you speak these words at night, something begins to shift, not outside of you, but within. The walls you built to protect yourself begin to soften. The racing thoughts begin to slow. The inner storm quiets, not because the world has changed, but because your soul has found its anchor. Every repetition is like the steady toll of a bell in the distance, calling you home. You may begin saying them with reluctance, out of duty, out of curiosity, but the soul remembers the sound of truth. And slowly, night after night, it starts to rise and meet those words with more openness, more trust, more surrender. At first it may feel like nothing is happening, but grace often works in silence. Roots grow in darkness. Healing comes without sound. The wounds you carry, the ones no one sees, are not beyond the reach of this phrase, because these words are not magic, but they invite a person, and that person is Jesus, the one who walked among the broken, the one who touched the unclean, the one who calmed storms with a whisper and called dead men back to life. Jesus, I trust in you. It's not about what you feel when you say it. It's about what happens when you place your soul in the hands of someone who cannot fail. Padre Pio once said that if the world understood the value of trust, it would never fear again. He believed that trust was not a passive resignation, but an active faith, like a child leaping into the arms of its father in the dark. And perhaps you have been afraid for too long, afraid of what's ahead, afraid of what you've lost, afraid of what you cannot control. This phrase is the answer to all those fears, not by solving them, but by placing them where they belong, into the heart of God. When you lie down tonight, before you close your eyes, try it. No pretense, no performance, just your voice in the silence. Jesus, I trust in you. Say it slowly, say it gently. Let the weight of the day fall from your shoulders with every word. Let go of what you cannot fix. Release what you cannot carry. If tears come, let them. If nothing comes, trust anyway. Because faith is not about feeling. Faith is about fidelity. And when you speak those words with a sincere heart, you are joining the chorus of saints, martyrs, mystics, souls like Padre Pio, who lived and died with those words written into their final breath. There was a man, a father of 4, who wrote once that this phrase saved his life. He had been struggling with depression, the kind that makes every morning feel like a mountain and every night feel like drowning. His wife gave him a prayer card with Padre Pio's picture. On the back were these words, "Before sleep say, Jesus, I trust in you." He didn't believe it would do anything, but that night, something in him broke. Maybe pride, maybe despair, and he said it anyway. Jesus, I trust in you. The next night he said it again, not because things had improved, but because something in his soul recognized a lifeline. Weeks passed. The storms didn't vanish, but they weakened. The darkness didn't disappear, but it no longer had control. And in time the phrase became his rhythm, not a magic fix, a path, a way through. Padre Pio never promised easy roads, but he promised grace. And this phrase is one of the purest conduits of that grace. You might ask, how can so few words carry so much strength? Because the one you speak them to is stronger than everything you fear. And when you say them with your whole being, when you whisper them at the edge of sleep, you are handing over the burdens you were never meant to carry alone. There is a kind of courage that hides in trust, a strength that does not roar but endures, and in those 6 words lies that quiet strength. Jesus, I trust in you. Let that be the last sentence your lips speak before you rest. Let it be your armor in the dark, your companion in silence, your shield against despair. Padre Pio taught us that our nights belong to God, not to fear, not to regret, not to shame, but to God. And if you give him your final thoughts each day, he will give you the strength for tomorrow. So tonight, when the world falls quiet, close your eyes and let go. Say it once, say it 10 times, say it until the words no longer come from your mouth, but from your soul. And let your sleep be your trust made visible. Let it be a sacred act, a nightly surrender. Because one day, perhaps far from now, or perhaps soon, your final sleep will come. And may the last words to cross your lips be the same ones that carried you through every darkness. Jesus, I trust in you, and in that final surrender, heaven will answer, and he will be there, waiting, smiling, ready. If these words touched your soul, give this video a like so that others may find it too. Subscribe for more spiritual reflections, stories, and hidden treasures of faith. And if you feel moved, share in the comments. What do you say before sleep? Has trust ever saved you? We would love to hear your story. You are not alone.